Oh, hello. Hi, everybody. I am Cindy Cohen, and I am the Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I can hardly contain my excitement at our event today. It's going to be so much fun because it's combining some amazing people with a topic that I am incredibly passionate about, and that is the effect of surveillance and privacy on all of us. So welcome. This is a part of our 30th anniversary year. And what we've been doing this year is having a series of conversations that we're calling EFF 30 Fireside Chats, commemorating the 30 years that EFF has been fighting for you and fighting for digital freedom. So remember that we are saving the final 15 minutes of this program for you. Drop your questions into the chat at twitch.tv/EFF Live. We'll pick them up and respond to as many as we can. Please also note that EFF has a code of conduct. We want everybody to be kind to each other today, so please make sure you keep that in mind. So this series of live discussions look back at some of the biggest battles in internet history, their effects on the modern web, and what they can teach us about where we need to go from here. And today we're taking a closer look at surveillance and the ways that privacy and its absence affect each of us and our communities. And I also want to talk a little bit about what it's going to look like if we get it right. So joining me today are three very special guests. First, EFF policy analyst Matthew Guariglia. I always screw that up. I'm so sorry, Matthew. Matthew's work on EFF's activism team focuses on surveillance and privacy issues at the local, state, and federal level. The folks at Ring can certainly attest to Matthew's effectiveness. He's an anti-surveillance activist and a historian of policing, and his bylines have appeared in NBC News, Washington Post, Slate, Motherboard, and of course, EFF's own blog. Thanks, Matthew. And next up is our Director of Engineering for CertBot, Alexis Hancock. Alexis is the leader of EFF's CertBot and HTTPS Everywhere web encryption projects. She's an expert on digital freedom and on consumer technology, and her latest research focuses on online rights and our digital identities in the age of COVID-19. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, I'm pleased to welcome somebody who, maybe you've heard of a little bit. His name is Έντουαρντ Σνόουντεν. He is a former U.S. intelligence officer who in 2013 blew the whistle on the NSA's massive unconstitutional surveillance apparatus, or as I like to call it, gave us standing, as well as its other global spying programs affecting millions of ordinary people around the world. He is a best-selling author, a technologist, and a cybersecurity expert, and the president of the board of our dear friends, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and of course, a renowned model of hoodies and EFF stickers. Thank you so much for joining us, Ed. Thank you so much for barring all the time zones and being with us here today.
It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. This is great. This is actually the first chat that I've been in where I can see comments from people. So everybody out there who's commenting in the live chat, hello, finally.
All right. So today we're going to talk about surveillance, and we want to bring together a few strands of issues that EFF has been working on for a long time. And these strands are often separated in the way that people think about it, where we think about surveillance as a national security issue. We think about things that we call at EFF street level surveillance, like the cameras that are all around us these days, and the technologies that help protect us against surveillance and counteract mass surveillance, especially. So around the world, these involve separate technologies, separate bodies of law, separate law enforcement agencies and administering agencies. But to me, at the bottom, they're really all asking the same question of us. Is it going to be possible to have a private conversation in the digital age? If so, what are we going to gain from that? And how do we get there? If not, what are we going to lose if we lose the ability to have a private conversation in the digital age? And it's very much at play right now. And I also want to say that today we're going to focus quite a lot about governmental surveillance, and not as much about corporate surveillance. But if anybody tells you that you have to choose between the two of these, or that one's more important than the other, they're kind of being phony. with you, truth is. That's because, and Matthew's work really highlights this, the surveillance done by companies is both available to and often spurred by governmental pressure and incentives. There's a kind of what I think of as an unholy alliance between the corporate trackers and the government trackers at this point. The companies build technologies that have surveillance built in because they want to know everything you're up to, and often sell it into a somewhat skeezy ad market, or even themselves just use it to, build an asset of customer information or simply cut corners around building technologies. I'm looking at you, Internet of Things people. But also because, as we all know, they want to track us and target ads to us, and that has become the holy grail of the internet. And the governments love it too. It means that they can just go to a company and find out what you've been up to. They don't have to, bother with pesky things like making sure that they're tracking you. And they can use mass techniques like tapping into the internet backbone or sending a FISA request to Google or Facebook to search everything that they have. So these two things work together, and anybody who tells you we only should focus on one or not the other, or that they're not interacted and we have to pick between the two of them, well, they're really not dealing in an evidence-based world. And I believe it's important that we do that. This is why EFF has long pushed not only against governmental surveillance, but for baseline privacy regulation around the world. And it's why that we think it's long time for companies to start thinking about you as someone they owe an obligation to. Lawyers call this a fiduciary duty. This idea that when somebody holds your data, they need to have the same responsibility for it that your accountant does when they hold your information, or your doctor does when they hold your information, or your lawyer when they hold your information, that they have to be primarily responsible to you for it, and they can't be two-faced about it and tell you one thing but actually do something else. So with that baseline of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk till about 12:45, and they're going to switch to your questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Twitch stream, and our team is picking them up and putting them in a place where we can get to them. So let's get right to it. Oh my goodness, I got to get to the right page. So let's start, Ed, with you. 2013, you did a little thing and it woke up the world about government surveillance. I'm assuming that if you're tuning into an EFF live stream, you probably know a lot about what Ed did and how it helped us. But what's changed since then? What are the changes that you see from where you sit in governmental surveillance of the kind that you showed us all?
Well, so let me dial back just an inch from that, because there are a lot of people who are familiar with what I did, but it's been like about eight years now since 2013. Some of the people who are on the stream were like, probably chewing on crayons 8 years ago. And for those who don't remember generally, like, there was a time when people didn't understand that everything that you did on the internet was watched to the degree that we know is true today. Like, there were many people who were spying on you doing different things, but it was like the company that was doing it, it wasn't shared. There's only so much they could know. It was very limited. It was not clear that there was this very intimate embrace between corporations and government. Not just one government, not just the United States government, which was the one that was exposed, but also many other governments around the world. In the United States, there was what was called the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which was the Anglophone countries around the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and this was a very close intelligence sharing partnership, to the point where they all had their sort of spy sensors on the internet that were watching communications as they raced past. And just so you can conceptualize that, for those of you who don't have that background, just think for a second. How is this stream getting to your laptop or your phone, right? From these people who are on different sides of the planet. Like, how functionally does that work? The internet is not made of magic. The little app that you tap on your phone is not made of magic. And you go, well, I'm connected to your Wi-Fi access point, right? Or I'm connected to AT&T or Verizon or whatever. Yeah, sure. But how does that work? And the reality is, all of our communications today, structurally, the technical, are intermediated by other people's computers and other people's infrastructure, cables buried in the ground, like cell phone towers that are on a building down the street, or satellites, that cross the sky, depending on where you're at. But all of these mediums are owned by someone. It can be the Starbucks, right, that you're sitting in back when the world was open. And the idea is all of these different routes that you cross, the wireless access point, that has to be connected to a cable somewhere, right? That 5 cable or the coax coming out of the wall. And that goes to someone. That goes to, Comcast or whoever your internet service provider is. And then Comcast, they have an agreement with someone else. They've got a big cable somewhere that goes to another internet service provider, that goes to a hearing provider, goes to a data center, that goes across the ocean to another one, to another one, to another one, to another one, that eventually lands in some place in Russia, where I am, or San Francisco, where Cindy Cohn is, or, New York or something, where you might be. And all around the world, this giant meshed together network of many different providers, you didn't know what was happening on it. Once that, communication hit the cable that goes out your wall, or hit the radio waves as it exits your phone and hits the cell phone. All of these lines that you were riding across, the people who ran them were taking notes of our communications. And our communications were largely unencrypted, which means they were transiting this network electronically naked, right? There was a time when everything that you typed in the Google search box not only was visible to Google, which is still true, but it was also visible to everybody else who was on that Starbucks network with you, right? And it was visible to your internet service provider, who knew this person who paid for this account searched for this thing on Google. Facebook and all these other guys, anybody who was in between your communications could take notes on these things. And then what is still true today, even as our communications become encrypted, meaning they're sort of armored as they transit this hostile, it's like wearing clothing or, being in a car that's got blacked out windows. They can still see your communications moving across the net, but they can't see what's inside. This is not true of all communications, but it's an increasing large fraction, except things like emails, which most people don't send encrypted. So the bottom line is our ignorance was being abused, or rather our innocence was being exploited. We didn't realize how hostile the internet was. I came forward in 2013, and I showed things that not just upstream communications, the kind of things that I described was happening, but this slide, which you may not see because it might be tiny, but you can blow your screen up, what's called the PRISM program, was where the government was working with, and this is literally the NSA working with the FBI to go to Google, to Apple, to Facebook, and say, we want to see what's in this person's account. And if you weren't American, and remember, I know we've probably got a lot of Americans on the call, but 95% of the world's population is not American. They didn't even need a warrant for this. They could just ask for it based on what they call a reasonable articulable suspicion, which I was taught at the NSA just means a gut feeling that you can write down. They could get everything that's in your account. And for an American, they could still get this information. There's just a slightly higher legal bar. And so now, what this means is your communications, as they cross the wire, could be taken by anyone just because they could and it was there. Anybody who was putting information about you, these big corporate silos, massive internet companies, who know everything you've ever clicked like on Instagram, every link that you've ever read from Facebook, and so on and so forth. They had these giant dossiers, which were becoming increasingly perfect records of our private lives. And they're sharing them. So Cindy asked to wind way back from the history lesson. Since 2013, since we learned, at least many of us learned, those of us who were paying attention, that this was happening, what's changed? Well, see, the funny thing about how free societies work and open societies, at least in theory, work, is we can't collectively decide on a response to a problem until we agree on what the problem is, until we know what's happening. And the most important thing that's happened since 2013 is that people now know we are being exploited, right? And awareness of what's happening has risen. And what this means is we can start to respond to bit by bit. It takes a long time. Some of these require technical solutions. Some of these require legal solutions, which means they require political solutions. And this is why we have groups like the EFF, right? If you're not a lawyer, if you're not a politician, if you're not an activist, if you're not a lobbyist or whatever, you're not going to be able to influence the policymaking process normally. But maybe you can help the EFF or the ACLU or some other group, and they can do this on your behalf. They can help move the ball forward. And this has really changed. EFF, ACLU, many different organizations around the country have been suing the government and forcing them in court to prove that their programs are lawful. And in just a few cases in the last few years, the courts are finally sort of raising an eyebrow at what the government's doing and going, y'all are violating the Constitution. Or as courts like to do, because they don't like to jump straight to the unconstitutional thing, they say, you have violated the law and you have likely violated the Constitution. Soon enough, we'll get to the point where they say, you have violated the Constitution. But, you know, this courts always act like 10 years, 20 years late. What happens in that intermediate period? Well, what people like you do. Maybe you install a different app. Maybe you stop using Facebook, right? Maybe you change your behaviors. Maybe you don't take the phone with you if you go a certain place where you don't want to be tracked, right? Maybe you start using an encrypted messenger, something like Signal, right? Instead of using something that's less secure, like SMS. Right? And this is the idea, is when we think about this problem of surveillance on the internet, there are many different prongs of it. There's communications in transit, what we described before, that hostile path where all of our stuff was naked. Well, as we encrypt it, they become more difficult to see into. Mass surveillance becomes more difficult. So everybody starts trying to spy through easier, cheaper means. Well, what's that? That's going to the companies. But then, what if you make sure these companies have less information about you by using sort of peer-to-peer communications or things where the company doesn't hold information that they can see? This is so-called zero-knowledge encryption. Now, they can't get information to the same degree as it crosses the internet. They can't get the same degree of information from the companies. You have protected yourself to a greater degree.
That's great.
What about everybody else? What about not, you know, everybody who's a specialist? And this is where we'll go now. There are still so many problems, and we're still fighting to fix them, but, you know, we're not there yet. There's so much work to be done.
Well, I really appreciate you calling out and explaining about this kind of pathway that things go on, because that's an area where we've really taken great strides. And Alexis, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about CertBot and our role in basically encrypting the web, because it's one of the bigger changes, and I think it doesn't get the attention that it does, because, you know, policy people like to talk about policies. But let's talk about the tech a little bit.
Yeah. So just yesterday, I actually checked on a benchmark that said that most web traffic is encrypted above 95% now, which is a great deal of news. So
it's a huge change.
Yeah, yes, it's leaps and bounds from 2013, right? And 2015 was a turning point, especially since major browsers like Chrome started to input messaging saying that, hey, this site is not secure. And sites started to scramble and say, hey, how do we do this? And that's where CertBot steps in, where it's a free open source software that we have at the EFF that we work on to actually automatically supply free SSL certificates or secure certificates for traffic, right, in transit, automating it for websites, web servers everywhere. And they've issued many millions of certificates by now. And
just let me jump in for a second here, because for those people in the chat who aren't familiar with, like, what is a certificate? Why is the EFF issuing certificates, right? Like, it's not like a paper certificate. All the encryption that we're talking about for web traffic, this big change that she mentioned, we're up at 95% now, is because of the issuance of these kind of security certificates, as they're called, which is really just a way to make the idea of public key encryption more legible. What is public key encryption? Look it up on Wikipedia, right? On YouTube. But this is the way all of your communications are protected. And this is work that Alexis and the EFF are doing. Your communications are more protected because of this issuance of security certificates.
Yes. Security certificates help basically keep data private in transit. So you'll see in your URL browser, you'll see HTTP, and that was the norm for a while. That's where it started. And in HTTPS, you can look at the S as the secure part, right? And once you see that happening in your browser, you'll know that your data is encrypted in transit. So that way it can have a layer of protection over what exactly is traveling between your request and that website server. So that's like more of an explanation there. But I'm really happy that now that we've had such more benchmarks according to, you know, the monitors of like Chrome and Firefox saying that it's around like 95% and up web traffic now. Firefox just last year put in an HTTPS only mode in their browser. Other browsers also offer default HTTPS as well. And there's other browsers that are starting to do things like keep the protocols up to date around TLS, the protocol that takes HTTPS. There's other things happening, of course, where mixed content blocking, that's more in the weeds of what, you know, things happen where you'll have an HTTPS site, a secure site, but they may be unencrypted links on the page still. So blocking that, things of that nature. So CertBot helps automate those certificates for the website, which creates that little padlock that you'll see, or HTTPS in your browser. And being able to use tools like that really, really helps along where it makes HTTPS the default. It helps makes HTTPS just work in the background for people. And so I think it's one of those things that don't get talked about a lot. Is because of the fact that it's becoming more of a normal process now. It's not as many arguments against HTTPS as it used to be. It used to be performance problems. It's going to be too hard to deploy on our users. But now we've all seen that that's not actually the case. And going forward, there's a lot more accessibility to actually do that. And CertBot and Let's Encrypt help make that a thing.
Yep. Let's Encrypt and HTTPS everywhere. Really, they're the pieces of this that you don't see and you shouldn't have to see unless you're, you know, setting up a website. But they give people the same kind of security that, you know, nobody sells you a car without brakes. Nobody should sell you a browser without security. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about the kind of, you know, what we call street level surveillance, ordinary surveillance that people are having in their day. And I want to bring Matt into this because this is really his area. Of course, Ed, chime in as we go. But, you know, what are some of the pieces of surveillance that you know, we also may not see, but that are really tracking us every day? And why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we said earlier, I think the boundaries between not just private and public surveillance are blurring, but also between federal and local surveillance, with things like fusion centers, which are really merging all of the information that can be collected by local police and sending it up the chain of command to the federal government. But if you are living in the United States today, you are likely walking past or carrying around with you street level surveillance everywhere you go. And this goes double if you live in like a concentrated urban setting or if you live in an over-policed community. And so you're likely to drive past automated license plate readers, which are going to photograph and record and timestamp your car every time you pass by a camera, private and public security cameras. And this is where it gets a little tricky because, you know, even if it's a Internet of Things doorbell camera that you put on your door, police can get a warrant or they can request from you or from your neighbor that footage. Or here in San Francisco, we have business improvement districts, as many cities do, which put up their own semi-private, semi-public security cameras. And so you think, so what? So the store knows I come in. But the thing is that police can often rely on this footage to request and to bring warrants. And a lot of the manufacturers of this street level surveillance technology are counting on it as part of their marketing because they've seen that police make very effective marketers. And so if they build a special interface that police have access to, they are more likely to go out to the community and sell it to stores or to homeowners associations to put up because they know they get the benefit of having private surveillance that is readily accessible to them without having to go through the bureaucratic loopholes or having the city pay for it themselves. Their facial recognition, ShotSpotter, which are these microphones in cities, which supposedly can detect and record supposed gunshots, although now there is increasing speculation that they have a high rate of false positivity for fireworks and car backfires. And the reason why all of this matters is because on the one hand, they trigger more police interactions. And as we've seen, especially with communities of color, with immigrants, working class communities, police interactions often have violent outcomes. And so if a shot spotter misfires and sends police, armed police to the site of what they think is a shooting, there is likely to be the higher chance of a more violent outcome if they get there and the kids who are shooting off firecrackers encounter these armed police who think they're going to a shooting. And this is the same for false positives on automated license plate readers and facial recognition, which police claim is just an investigative lead, right? It's just giving them a lead that they can follow up and investigate. But too often police get a supposed match and they go out and they immediately arrest that person without following up to see if they were even in the city of the day of a supposed robbery they're following up on. And the other way this affects communities is that when you put any community under a microscope, like some cities are under in terms of just constant street level surveillance on every block via geolocation tracking or facial recognition or automated license plate readers, police are going to find a reason to arrest and harass people. Because a majority of what police do every day are not finding serial killers and terrorists. They're ticketing people for jaywalking, and they're arresting people for jumping turnstiles at the subway. And so if you put any community under the microscope that these over-surveilled communities are under, you're going to find a reason to harass, and ticket people. And this provides a statistical problem, because surveillance is part of the self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more you surveil people, the more you're able to ticket and harass them. And then the more the numbers look like that is a high crime neighborhood in need of more surveillance and policing. And so this really disproportionately impacts communities of color, vulnerable communities, and communities that are already over-policed.
Yeah, and of course, if you add machine learning onto that, you double down on the targeting. So it's one of the things that we all, I think, hopefully have learned at this point, that slanted data in, even more slanted data out of most machine learning systems. So, and what do you think about the kind of opening up of I think more and more awareness and more surveillance at a kind of hyper local level?
Yeah, I mean, look, Matthew talked about things like automated license plate recognition, and we've got all these cameras everywhere that are now networked. Those are being increasingly analyzed, not necessarily at the local level, but frames get sent when there's object recognition that's done locally that goes, this looks like a face. Why don't we send that face back to the mothership? And when you've got a timestamp indicator, this person was at this location, right? Or this face, maybe we don't even have an identity. But then we see the face pop up somewhere else. Then we see the face pop up somewhere else. Then we see the face pop up somewhere else. And 3 years later, you have, a perfect record of this person's movements. Anywhere that they interact with commerce, anywhere that they interact with a developed area. Maybe it doesn't have you at your home, but the minute you turn onto the interstate, your license plate gets on the interstate. And you drive 3 states over, you don't even have a phone with you, but your car turns off here, and they know you went from this place to this place generally. And then you go to the local, you enter the parking garage, guess what? You pick up another plate. Now they know here where you're at. And the whole idea is, should we compile records that are so comprehensive, they're held by so many groups? This isn't like, we're not talking the CIA here. We're talking any company with enough money to pay a data broker to go, look, we just want the fire hose. We want all the stuff that you get, or at least the ability to query your databases, because we don't really care what it is. You interrelate it with something else. We saw this license plate show up outside our store at a strip mall, and we want to know how much money we have. We want to know what neighborhood. We want to go, is there a public record that this license plate, is associated with this house on, for example, like a Google Street Maps type thing. Notice they're starting to blur those now, but that wasn't always the case. Can we put this through an image search? Was this license plate photographed anywhere? Put your license plate number or picture in the back of your car into an image search prompt, and sometimes you'll get results. And when we combine this with faces, when we combine this with the presence of your phone, because remember, your phone is throwing off a lot of identifiers too if you don't have it super locked down. It's throwing off Bluetooth beacons. It's telling Facebook, for example, what kind of wireless networks are around you. Because you know how your phone always, you pull down that little lampshade menu and it goes, oh, which kind of Wi-Fi access point do you want to connect to if you're not at home, and even if you are at home? Well, those are a proxy for location, because all these wireless access points, they're radiating over the air. So these can be mounted, and they are mounted. People's app from your phone just report this. And if you have location services enabled at the same time you have this, and in some operating systems, you have to have location services to interact with these kind of Wi-Fi access points. You get this location information. Then they have a GPS fix for all these Wi-Fi networks. So then when someone else has their GPS turned off, but they are able to see Wi-Fi networks, they still know where you are, even with GPS turned off. And then you turn off all the location sensors on your phone, but the cell phone network still knows where you're at. Like we talked about before, like how does the network? You dial a phone number, and that phone rings wherever it is on the planet, instant. How? How does the network know where you're at when you got location services turned off, right? When you have Wi-Fi turned off, when you have Bluetooth turned off, when you have GPS turned off, but you're still connected to the network, right? Well, you're registering to the nearest cell phone tower to you, saying, here I am, here I am. Your phone is constant screaming out to you, here I am, here I am. Is there a cell phone tower that hears me? And the cell phone tower goes, I hear you. You create a handshake, and then whoever owns that cell phone tower enters you into a register. It can be a home register if that's where you're frequently at, or it can be a visitor register if you're like often. But then they share this upstream. The phone globally knows where all phones are at all times. That's how they can signal to each other wherever you are, right? And location services doesn't turn that off.
Yep.
Because it can't turn that on.
And it shouldn't. I mean, I think that this is where, we started off talking about how, there are technical issues, there are legal issues, there are policy issues. Technically, I want my phone to ring no matter where I am. That's like one of the great benefits of modern technology. I mean, some people call it a curse, but that you can get a phone call no matter where you are. I want that to be it. And so that's an area where, rather than technical, there may be some technical things we could do, but fundamentally we need legal protections. And the good news is the Supreme Court has actually started recognizing that, that just because you're out in public doesn't mean that there isn't some agglomeration of information or information over time about you that doesn't trigger a warrant requirement. Now that's some starter pieces, but that's an area where, to me, like when we think about all the tools in our toolbox, the technical tools are a little probably, they're not going to get to the place where I don't think where the company doesn't know where your phone is, because there's some ways we want that to be. But the legal protections can make sure that the company is very limited in what it can do with that information, especially when the government comes knocking. So I want to shift a little in the last, well, we've got a little more time. I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID, because we're in COVID times, and a lot of the work that Alexis has done, especially, but I think all of us have done at EFF, is try to balance, the needs of this pandemic with the concerns about surveillance and the recognition that I think, as Ed knows well, things that you do in the moments of crisis, they don't just go away, right? Like you have to think carefully about what you do in a moment of crisis, especially around surveillance, because here we are in 2021, and we're still trying to stop some things that got implemented right after the September 11th attacks that don't have much utility anymore, I think it's fair to say. So Alexis, let's talk a little about COVID and some of the surveillance concerns we've had, and what you guys on the EFF team especially have done to try to mitigate those.
So we've been tracking some things ever since contact tracing kind of came onto the scene. And I think the baseline I've been trying to do in our research is to find out where technology can and can't help. And when is technology being presented as a silver bullet for certain issues around the pandemic, when it technically should not be, when people are the center of being able to bring us out of this, right? And health and access to healthcare. So one of the things was contact tracing, and the other part that's become more recent is vaccine passports or digital credentials, really, that are being proposed as solutions to present if you're vaccinated or not in different contexts. And the context we were worried about was the scope creep. So we already do have situations, international travel, schooling, educational institutions where we present that we're vaccinated or not in certain contexts, right? And those systems already exist. But what these proposals were presenting are contexts that don't exist currently. Presenting if you're vaccinated going into a grocery store, presenting if you're vaccinated to access public services. And that is when we started to step in there and talk about, okay, what exactly are we trying to solve here? And are we actually creating more barriers for people to access everyday services and being able to actually access healthcare in a way that makes sense? And storing your medical data with private companies who want to present private solutions to other private companies doesn't necessarily deem a solution. So we wanted to be able to actually talk about that. And with contact tracing, we had parameters up, right, to actually have privacy in mind first and foremost, because of the fact that, you know, if you wanted contact tracing to be effective, it has to be widely adopted, right? In order to be widely adopted, you need people to actually trust it, and people don't trust it, it won't work. So that's one of the things that we've had happen and actually kept track of. And then with vaccine passports, most of the solutions don't talk about what happens after all this is quote unquote over. We don't know what do we do with that data? What is the data retention policy? Will the context of digital credentials with medical data be expanded? We don't know, and we don't, and that is the actual problem that I actually have, is the long-term consequences that can happen out of this. You mentioned 9/11. We've had entire institutions created just from 9/11. So when we treat everything as the bad guy in the room and protecting us from said bad guys, when we're creating permanent solutions that actually affect people that we were technically saying that we were protecting and saving and keeping secure and safe. We have the DHS, we have ICE, we have all these other institutions that were created out of that time of fear. And we don't want to create more institutions that are permanent and cause digital barriers and cause more detriments to everyday citizens out of fear. We should be creating digital solutions that help. One of my main things is keeping technology in a way where and creating technological solutions that are actually helpful. I'm actually personally tired of technology feeling so nefarious. I make a phone call, I make a text, and all these different vectors are able to attack me at all places. And I'm personally very tired of that. I want technology to actually work. I love technology, and there needs to be people in place to actually think about it when they're actually creating new solutions and ask themselves, is this actually helping humanity? If it is not, then you need to halt that process and not build that out. And we're hoping that with digital vaccine passport solutions, that they actually halt and think about it before they actually deploy something else that will need to be worked out and fixed. And I don't think the pandemic is a time to roll out experimental technologies like that.
Yeah.
That's a great response. I just want to follow up on that because, you know, Alexis, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the metric that we stopped asking ourselves in the United States, which is really sad relative to, you know, when I was young. You know, when I was in school and the teacher was being frankly a dick, kids would say reflexively, "It's a free country, isn't it?" And it feels like people don't say that so much anymore. Like Matthew, what you were talking about with local policing and all these things getting into us. Alexis, what you were talking about with more and more increasing layers of commissioning, more and more gates that we have to walk through in order to go to the store, in order to travel, in order to get a job. We have to prove ourselves and establish ourselves. The satisfaction of who? To a government, to a corporation, to some kind of institution, to a person, again and again and again. Whereas it used to be when it was not possible to know as much about us. It was not required that we establish as much about ourselves. And this is something that, you know, I've been struggling with a lot, because when you talk about privacy to other people, you know, it comes off all very abstract and strange. But, you know, we as Americans Even if it's wrong, even if it's a false invented history, even if it's like national myths, they are things that for a lot of us we believe. Whatever, because Hollywood told us, because we watched a show and like it felt right. You know, we're the good guys, we're wonderful. And a lot of that, frankly, is wrong. But the idea can still be true. And what is liberty today? Is it being able to install whatever app you want, right? Is it being able to choose whether you want Facebook to screw you or whether you want Google to screw you? Liberty is freedom from permission. It's being able to act without having to ask. And what happened to that? When we begin to intermediate every connection that we have, every, you know, connection to a relative, to someone we love, to a friend, to the pizza store with a sheet of glass, right, that we stare into that glows in our face, that we paid for, but doesn't really belong to us because it doesn't answer to us, because increasingly we don't control it, but it controls us. It says you must send this, you must send a picture, you must send your bank account information, you must send whatever. And we have to answer this. Have we become more free in the last 20 years, or have we become less free? And if we become less free, why is that? And what can we do about this? Sydney brought up something, you know, very interesting in the beginning. This idea of a fiduciary duty. And like it sounds like this crazy legal term like fiduciary or banking or something like that. But think about it, guys. If you go to the hospital and the doctor, you know, knows everything about you, you know, they know the size of your feet, and they've got it in your medical charts. They're not supposed to sell them to Nike. You know, he's not supposed to send you coupons for a certain size shoe. But you know, with the internet, with all this data collection technology, everybody is using this private, very personal information they get to effectively build billboards outside your house. If your doctor did that, if your lawyer did that, if your accountant did that, you know, we would burn their office down. Why do we accept that it's okay here? Maybe the city is right. Maybe we need to establish a fiduciary duty for these guys in legislation, the same way we do for every other class that has privileged access to information about our lives. Maybe we say this data doesn't belong to them. Maybe this data belongs to us, even if they hold it, if it's about us. We own it, or we should be. Our devices, you know, they force us to click these user consent agreements, you know, that end user licensing agreement. You're signing up for an account, you know, it says click OK to continue. And there's not like choice, like no thanks. Like some of these things, you have to install the app. You have to agree it. You have to, in order to get a job, in order to pay your bills, in order to buy a car. Like Teslas have these things on. More and more cars, you have to agree. More and more things, whether they are cars, whether they're computers, whether it's your phone, you have to click OK to continue. And if you must do something, it's not consent. It's not a choice. We're being given the illusion of consent. And all of our laws, all of our politicians are pretending it is equivalent to the fact. But we don't have to go along with that. Honestly, questioning that is, I think, what a huge part of the EFF's work has been. And that's why I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you guys today, is to say thank you.
Oh, thanks. Well, back at you. It's so great to have you. As I told you this before, it's so great to have you on our team, Ed, and you really are. And let's go to the questions. I promised everybody, but I do have a final question for everybody that I'm going to get to at the end, and I want you all to think about a little bit, which is, you know, give me. I will want a couple points from each of you. So what's the world going to look like if we get this right? What's it going to look like? Let's
go round robin. You want to start with that?
And I want you to think about it, because we got some user questions, but I will ask this at the end, and I wanted to give you a chance to know, because this is really where I'm focused a lot right now. I feel like, and some of this is, of course, you know, my job is to tell you, is to you know, help run an organization that tells you all the ways that you're being tracked and all the ways that things are bad and all the fights that we're in. And I feel like we need to at least take a little moment to talk about what what this is going to look like if we get it right, because we're going to get it right. That's my job. That's our job. We're going to get there. And so we need to start thinking about envisioning that. But let's get to the questions from because we have a lot of them. We will not get through all of them. I apologize in advance. My crack team is pulling them out of the thing and organizing them. The first one is, Obviously, facial recognition, and it's from Icarus Redux. Obviously, facial recognition is a hot button issue these days, with cities taking up initiatives to ban its use by governmental entities. But facial recognition is something that necessarily piggybacks off of pervasive video surveillance, irrespective of the inherent bias of algorithms. What emerging technologies or collaborations of technology do you think pose the biggest risk towards mainstreaming at a city, state, national, or international level? Matthew, I'm going to go to you first because I know you're so deep in the facial recognition fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the startling things is just how casual and easy to use the technology has become. I mean, you have police officers or drones or even robots to some extent equipped with this technology who can just like whip their phone out at a protest, scan over the crowd, and like get the names and faces and everywhere where their faces has appeared on the internet before. And this technology has become casual. It's become ubiquitous. You don't need a warrant to use it often. Oftentimes, police enter into agreements with these companies without permission from anybody. Oftentimes, these companies will market it with free trials directly to the officers without even going to administrators. So, I mean, I think the big fear is that, we're going to reach a moment where a drone can zip over a crowd at a protest, and every single person in that crowd can be identified. Their social media accounts can be linked to their photograph. And that really opens up people to reprisal and retribution from the government, depending on what they're protesting. Especially if what you're protesting is the police who are surveilling you. And so I think, the real concern about this technology is just how ubiquitous, easy to acquire, easy to use it is, and how few regulations there are on how to use it, which is why EFF advocates for banning government use of face recognition and why so many cities have taken the step to do it.
Yeah, and this is a good time to mention the Electronic Frontier Alliance, which is the network of groups across the country that are really taking this local. And if any of you are either members of EFA groups, thank you. If you're not and you want to join one or start one in your group, let it go. Because, a lot of this local work, it really, EFF is happy to support, but it's the local people showing up at the Board of Supervisors or the state legislatures or county that really makes the difference and demonstrates to lawmakers that this is something that really matters to the community. Let me go to a next one because this is directed to Ed. It's R. Zuberi. Edward, thank you for joining us. Constitutional protections are extremely limited and somewhat suspended at the border, airports, etc. Fourth Amendment and First Amendment, respectively. That being the case, how can we enforce the government to protect our digital privacy at the border? And how do we pressure the legislatures into pass the necessary pending bills that will, in fact, protect us?
It's a great question. I mean, the primary question is, how do we pressure legislators to do anything? The sad reality is when you look at the way our system functions, today it's really not functioning. This is not assertion by me. This is like academic journals, political science that are studying the system. Say if you look at all of the different ways you could interpret the U.S. political system as currently working, it's either dominated by economic elites, which mean like the CEOs of companies and whatnot are the ones who are able to effectively get their will represented in Congress and laws passed, or by sort of a plurality of interest groups. These could be corporate, these could be non-governmental, but it has to be a very sophisticated sort of institutional effort in order to get Congress to do anything. And I mean, if you look at the history of U.S. legislation in the last decades, you'll see it doesn't really represent the public interest. And this is very clear. You simply look at public polling on an issue, and then you look at the legislative history of the issue, and you see they don't align. How do we fix that? I mean, this is like a Lawrence Lessig kind of question. You need structural reform to the way our politics work, changes in campaign finance to make sure that it's not just very rich people who are the only ones that it's worth the time for a congressperson to pick up the phone to listen to. But then beyond that, there are, and this is another question within the chat that I saw come up, I think it was Volker from Germany just now, said, you know, do I see like open source software or non-proprietary software as like a primary response to this? And the answer, of course, is yes. You know, I might say free software, freeze of freedom, not freeze of beer. But the idea here is there are the avenues that the system provides to us for us to sort of appeal for the redress of grievances. This is sort of like the proper channels argument, whistleblowing. That says, go talk to your boss, you know, go talk to your management, go talk to a senator, and they'll fix everything. What if they won't? What if they can't? Well, I believe we have the inherent, also the responsibility to provide and create new systemic avenues for providing for the common good when they're presented to us. Creating, contributing, and using free software is a way to sort of pursue this, but it's not enough. And this is why organizations like the EFF are so important. Like, even if you're not economic elite, even if you're not part of, you know, that interest group, the EFF is the kind of organization that can at least try to provide us some kind of, so we're not completely ignored. But remember that that's not enough. There's what you can do. Maybe you're a developer. Maybe you can use these tools. Maybe you're interested in technology and you know a little bit about it. Maybe you can use these tools. Maybe you're not. But there's probably something else you can do, something else that I don't know you can do, right? It might be something that you know you can do. But if you care enough, if you look enough into these things, if you investigate, if you have a curious mind, you will find ways that make a difference. We all can individually and also collectively.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, that's such a great call to action. And of course, EFF, our tech projects are open source and we're always looking for volunteers. Our EFA groups and other groups are doing a lot of this work. And when it comes specifically to the border, EFF and the ACLU have a piece of litigation where we won tremendously in the district court. We lost horribly in the First Circuit, and now we're asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take on to vindicate your First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights at the border. So, you know, we're going to do the activism, we're going to do the technology work, and we're going to do the legal work, because, you know, when people ask me, you know, which of these should we do, and the answer is, of course, always all of the above. And as Ed points out, you need to look into your own heart to figure out where you best fit in trying to help make the world a better place. But everybody has a thing that they can do to help be part of this movement.
I just want to underline that Cindy had a much better actual answer to the question there on borders. We're taking it to the Supreme Court. So yeah,
it's a team effort, my friend. One other question, and this is one that I think it will be great for folks to hear. This is from J. Paul CVSP. Surveillance culture. Given the ever-increasing sophistication of granular surveillance at scale, isn't the eventuality of living in a world without anonymity ultimately inevitable? If so, do you think it will still be possible to balance power between governments and the people? And how would a potentially threatened democracy begin planning for this eventuality? More oversight and regulation. So are we, you know, is this you know, privacy is dead, get over it? Is that the place where we need to be? And I'm gonna start again. I'm gonna start with Matthew on this, because I know you think about it a lot, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I don't think it's inevitable. I mean, I think there is a looming backlash that we see at the street level, at the federal level, of people who have had quite enough of, you know, as Alexis was saying, how exhausting it is that tech is betraying you, that you are knowable all the time and seeable, and that these things have consequences, especially for criminalized populations. So, I mean, I think there is a coming backlash, but I also think that there is an alternate future in which being knowable is not as scary as it is now, if there is actual a trust and a feeling of benevolence between citizens and government. That, like, you know, centuries of criminalization and racialization have created a system in which you are afraid to be knowable by your government because it is such a punitive institution. And so I think both that future is not inevitable, but if it is, there is a way to imagine that future that is less scary.
Oh, that's great, because you segued into my last question anyway, which is how do we imagine a better future? Alexis, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So I always tell people during my security trainings that, you know, no technology makes you a ghost online. None of it. Even the most secure, anonymous driven tools out there, nothing makes you a ghost on the internet. And I don't think that it comes down to necessarily your own personal burden. Like, you're not burdened alone when it comes to that feeling. And I think people can relish in the fact that there's actually a more collective unit now that are noticing that, you know, that burden and is not yours to bear, right? So there's that. Far as like future, as far as our privacy goes, it's going to take, you know, firing on all cylinders, like Cindy said, with activism, technology, and legislation. It's going to have to take all three of these parts. And what I tell people is just know that there are people fighting out there that do want to make a better future for you when you are presented online. I always tell people to do a power analysis of what's going on with whatever technology that they are using. If you feel like your ISP would rat you out, if you feel like your phone would just rat you out, do you feel like AT&T or whatever telecoms communications that you're using will rat you out? Start targeting the power analysis in your life in that way. And I guarantee you there's somebody standing there fighting. I guarantee it, that once you start looking on who's fighting, you'll find them. And it's a really corny thing to look on, but I always go by a quote where it's like, you know, if you look for darkness, that's all you'll ever see. But if you look for light, you will often find it. And yes, that is from an animation called The Last Airbender. And it's very corny, but that's something that I live by when I do my privacy work. So that is something that I usually do and look to when I do tell people to not necessarily just lay all arms down and stop fighting. Somebody there is still fighting. And I guarantee there's something you can do to help them.
Oh, that is so great. Okay, Ed, we've got 3 minutes left. You get the last word on this.
Okay. I'm not going to promise I'm going to hit 3 minutes. But first off, that was a great quote. That was a great show.
I know.
And it's amazing that you quoted that on stream. I just want to respond to like what Matthew said earlier that gets into this. Like, the question is basically like, isn't it true that nobody cares? And whether it is or not, you know, can things be better? And first of all, I think it's not true. Everybody says, you know, nobody cares. I think so many. I think they feel like they can't do anything. You know, I've given like talks about this in all kinds of audiences, and I always get some ancient Charlie Rose looking moderator at like, you know, these like type conferences, very serious people, and they're like, isn't it true that young people don't care about this? I'm like, no, it's not true. And when I give the same line in front of an audience of an older generation and a younger generation about privacy, younger people have a stronger response. Younger people understand the intrusion of this because they've been burned by it. They have a dumb friend who put something that they shouldn't on their Facebook timeline, or tagged them in something that shouldn't, or they know someone the same way. They see the harms, right? Or at least they can understand. But they feel, and probably believe quite rationally, that they can't do it. The thing is, this raises the question of like, does it have to be that way? We talk about like facial recognition cameras, license plate readers, like these biometrics are being increasingly collective. What do we do about it? You can't change your face. You can't change your fingerprints, right? Like, you don't really get to change your license plate easily. That's the whole reason they do that. It's the same reason all of these apps require your phone number. It's a pain to change your number. They're trying to get ways of tracking you that are difficult, costly for you to change. When we talked about permissioning before, like all these companies seem to do this stuff when new technology comes out, like they buy all these you know, facial recognition scanners and whatnot. They don't ask for permission. We talked about a permissionless world. These institutions, these corporations, their government, in these governments, they live in a permissionless world. But our world is increasingly unfree, illiberal, and permissionless. Does it have to be? And particularly when we're talking about data collection, we're talking about digital surveillance. I think what we need to do is we need to think about what the weaknesses of the system as it currently exists. What are the points at which it could possibly fail, right? What are the principles that the operation of these systems of mass surveillance or bulk collection or whatever you want to call them, the presumptions that these systems make, that they need to make in order to operate, what happens if those presumptions fail? Like on the corporate prong here, we're talking about things like the fact that mass surveillance as a practice is legal. In many cases, it's lawful. They say you agreed to this because you clicked OK to continue, even if you didn't read the agreement, even if you couldn't read the agreement, even if there are studies that show if you try to read all these things in a year that you go through, you don't have enough time. So how can it be that legally we treat it as if you did agree? There's no possible way in which you could agree. You couldn't even read these agreements. And then if we move away from corporations, right, to governments, where we're not talking about what's legal, because in the words of Henry Kissinger, they said, the illegal, we do immediately. The unconstitutional takes a little bit longer. They do it because mass surveillance is cheap. It's very simple. It's very easy to do at scale. Could we make these capabilities unlawful for corporations? And could we make them costly for governments? I think in almost all cases, the answer is yes. And if, like Alexis said, you're looking around for other people that are doing this. In the rare case, you can't find somebody doing anything about it. The answer there is the person that you're looking for is you. You can and should be the first, right? When I was at the NSA wearing an EFF hoodie, by the way, remember they can't do this work unless people like you contribute to them. I talked to my coworkers, I talked to my colleagues, I showed them what was happening, which they didn't know because they didn't have the need to know. And it's like nobody was going to do anything about it because nobody felt that they could do anything. But the reality is any one of us could do something about it if only we dared to try. And sometimes the person that you're waiting for is you.
Oh, well. There's no bigger mic drop moment than that one, let me tell you. Thank you so much for this conversation. I want to thank Ed. Oh, we got Alexis back. That's good. Ed, Alexis, and Matthew for joining us today. I want to thank everyone who contributed to our discussion in the chat and who did such great questions. And all of you watching around the world. It's frustrating to be in COVID times, but honestly, this is an event that we probably couldn't have done at the scale that we did if it weren't in COVID times. So we look for our little silver linings where we can get them. This is EFF's 30th anniversary, and I am duty bound as the executive director to tell you that our movement to protect rights and freedoms begins with you. EFF has led the charge for privacy, free expression, and innovation for over 30 years and counting, and we need your help to keep up the fight, as Ed pointed out so generously. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to donate to EFF today and to become a member at EFF.org/30. And that's all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining us. And I hope that you'll continue these conversations about freedom and technology with your colleagues and your friends and your loved ones, wherever you are. And thank you so much. And we'll see you at the next EFF 30 Fireside Chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. And thank you guys for all the work you do. And thank you, everyone in the chat, for joining us tonight. Stay free.